Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're live.
Well,
We're up.
okay, I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to our fifth and final meeting of the reform panel of the police. Now, prior meetings, we've had some interaction with the public, and I'd also like to just once again thank the people who are on our panel. There's Police Chief Robert Doss, Town Police Officer Hardy Pierce, Town Councilwoman Sylvia Santiago, Ms. Syria Fresco Perez, which is a Valesgate principal, Anthony Magnano, a pastor at the New Windsor's Encounter Church, James Hubbard, Air Force veteran, NAACP member and town resident, Stuart Rosawasser from the District Attorney's Office, Alana Harris, a youth representative, college student, and town resident, Neil Fernandez, town resident, Sean Davis, a youth pastor at the Valesgate Solid Rock Church in Valesgate, Dr. Sarah Ruback, who is Assistant Executive Director of St. Christopher's, which is in New Windsor, and Randy Seiper, a local defense attorney and town resident. So as I said, we've been meeting since February 14th at the direction of the governor, New York State Governor Cuomo, as Executive Order 203. And it's been about police reform and reinvention, the collaborative plan that we needed to put together. And I'd also like to thank the town attorney, Dave Zagon, who's been with us this whole time, and our IT department, John McDowell and his staff, for keeping us online and letting people interact with us. We have some interaction from the public. We also have some emails that were received by the police chief and myself, and we appreciate the people's interest in this. So I'll just quickly go over our proposed reform and reinvention plan. It talks about use of force policy, department discipline, employee assistance program, body worn camera program, community policing unit, which interacts with a whole bunch of folks. And I think that a lot of this stuff that we had in place, we've kind of massaged it a little bit. But one of the things that we've very recently introduced is the body cameras for our officers, which eliminate a lot of he said, she said, and we've already found it to be very helpful for us in some of our investigations. And we're very happy that the community stepped up, and there was donations towards that project, about $30,000 donated for a $36,000 project. So there wasn't much of a load on the town taxpayers, which is always a concern of mine. But I really believe that we needed these body cameras when I first got here last year, and I'm glad that we have put them in play. I know the chief is very happy with them, and we've had no complaints from our office, so I think it's good for everybody. Also delved into a little bit of the crisis intervention team, which is every member of the department that's involved in that. We also involved with Fearless of Hudson Valley, formerly Orange County Safe Homes. We now have one of their people comes to our police station, I think, once a week. I may not be right about that, but that's just started. They are actually on site with us now. We've introduced the Hope Not Handcuffs. We're trying to get people some help and not send them off to jail when they have some drug problems. We've had some very good comments from people. I just saw an email the other day from a woman who was thanking the police chief for the program, and it's kind of saved her son. And she was happy that he was able to get into that program and not have to get into jail for his drug addiction, and seems to be on his way now to straighten himself out. We also had the drug collection drop box program where you can drop some drugs off here and we get rid of them. We just had someone the other day and we got rid of a lot of drugs that we had. What did we have, Chief? We had a lot, right?
Yes, we collected for every police department in the county from all their drop boxes. It was 1,960 pounds, almost 1 ton.
Yeah, that's a ton of drugs. So I think that's certainly a step in the right direction. We're also involved in Operation Safeguard, which works with the New York State Homeland Security. We're involved with the Narcan program. Those who are not familiar with Narcan, is where we're able to treat people right at the scene who have an overdose, and instead of dying, we're able to bring them back. And we've had many instances of using that particular program, and it works well. And all our officers are trained in it, and they all carry the Narcan. We have some training modules that we go through, which has to do with de-escalation, trying to kind of bring the temperature down when we get to some of these complaints where people are agitated. Many of them have to do with mental health issues and domestic issues, and it's sometimes they really get out of control. But with these de-escalation training program, it's helped us. The crisis intervention. Another training program for us very much is needed. We're happy with is the firearms training and evaluation. We do that twice a year with all our officers. The safe and effective use of the taser. I think the taser is a great weapon for the police sometimes. And in the old days, cops would be taking out nightsticks and there'd be all kinds of physical confrontation. The tasers are used now to kind of settle people down. And I think a lot of the officers have been tased themselves in training, so they understand what it is the tasing does. So that they're not too quick to tase somebody, but it's also an effective tool, not only not injuring the subject, but also not injuring the police officer who many times gets injured and is out of work for a period of time due to the injury. We also have the training module on the safe and effective use of less lethal weaponry. Tactics and trust, fair and impartial policing, which is an annual training that the police do. Procedural justice training done annually. Strengthening the police and community, and that was one of the things that came out of this these meetings that we had, that we realized that we needed to get a little more involved with that. And training module on tips for conducting professional traffic stops, which is a dangerous part of police work, is traffic stops. So I think the chief has got some action items that he's kind of putting into place here as a result of these meetings. One is the establishment of a permanent community advisory panel, which I think is a good idea, that the community is involved with the police to see exactly what we do. We've had some comments from our panel members over the last couple of months saying they didn't realize or weren't aware of the things that the officers go through on a daily basis. And I think it is good for everybody to kind of see what sometimes the things that they're up against and the training that we provide for them. And also the chief is talking about a ride-along program where you get to ride along with a police officer on a shift to see exactly what he or she is doing on that particular shift. And a lot of departments do that, and general public seems to like that. It's a good way to get an idea what actually goes on. And then those people usually talk to other people to say, hey, listen, I took a ride along and I was out the other night and I saw with officer so-and-so, and we had this call, and the way it was handled, and understanding what they go through once in a while. Select general orders, policy, procedures. The town determines the publication of those general orders. So some of them will be able to put out with an annual report. We're going to be reporting citizen complaints and use of force, including the aggregate data. So the resources for domestic violence victims, resources for crime victims, information regarding training and certification, information recruiting and hiring. That's a subject that we talked about at one of our meetings with our panel, the recruiting and hiring of people. And one of the things that we brought up was that how we hire people off a county list. In other words, there's a civil service test given by the county. The county gives the test, and then after the test, then becomes the physical agility, the background, the medical. But the police, local police, don't really get involved with the testing. It's kind of up to the county to do, and then they establish a list, and then we would do a background investigation to see if this is somebody that we would like to have in our police department. The chief is also highlighting community partnerships and a dedicated email address for public comments, complaints, and suggestions. So that email would go right to the chief or the deputy chief, and anybody had any comments or complaints, they could send it to them. My office is always available for complaints or comments. I do get them from time to time, and we take them up with the police chief or the deputy chief. Another action item, he's exploring the purchase and use of early intervention system, which seeks to identify at-risk officers early to address problematic behavior. So what that simply means is that if an officer starts to get too many complaints, commonly referred to in the business as personnel complaints, then you really need to start taking some look at the intervention. Some of the officers that we have seen nationally, and one in particular sticks in my mind, he had, I think, 19 years as a police officer, 18 complaints. Seemed to me somebody should have been looking at that. So I've been discussing with the chief this program that we're looking to put in place. Another action item that he's suggesting is seeking creative ways to advance reform goals and encourage more intensive interaction with the community and participation in community events. So the chief is very anxious to get that going, to include the community in what we do, so they see what we do. And obviously, if they don't like some of the things that we do, then we need to hear about it, and we'll be able to discuss it and, if need be, explain it, or if need be, change it. Another action item is adding implicit bias training to the annual training program for all officers, and to seek community involvement or participation in such training. So we think it's important that they have this bias training, and we want to do it every year, and we would like some input from the public. Another action item he talks about is adding training in therapeutic crisis intervention and youth mental health first aid. So this is always an issue for the police department. They're very, very involved in these mental health issues. And we know that we'd like to get the mental health professionals more involved with us, but we have kind of seen that when something happens, it usually happens off hours, and sometimes they are able to respond, and sometimes they're not able to respond. So the reality of the situation is the one who always responds is the police officer. So we're looking to kind of get some more training with that, and hopefully that the mental health folks from the county will be able to kind of maybe get a little more people in their program. An annual consideration feedback from police officers attending and continuing availability. So we have St. Christopher's in town, and they're dependent on offering some entity, so we'll work with them. Another action item, explore additional options geared towards stress reduction to the department's existing employee assistance program. So we're talking about the officers now. So we kind of need to identify if someone is under some kind of stress, and if they are, then we need to help them. So that's another item that's very high on the chief's list. And then his last action item, so there's 8 of them, exploring ways to lessen the burden of the police department as it pertains to interactions with and holding a person suffering from mental health crisis. And that is a big part of what goes on. Kind of mentioned this to the panel a few times, that every morning the first thing I do is review the police blotter with the police chief or the deputy police chief, and I go over everything that happened the day before. And invariably, there are a lot of these type of calls that we're on. So we realize that they have potential for some bad outcomes. So we have the officers have been to a lot of training, but we intend on giving some more training. But some of the things that we have seen with the body cams, with officers responding to some of these people in a mental health crisis, they have really, really gone the extra mile. I was really happy to see how they handled it. And having been in law enforcement myself for a long, long time, I can tell you things have changed. You know, these guys try to bring the temperature down, and I think the training has a lot to do with it. And myself and the town board, we really don't kind of spare any money when it comes to police training. Anybody who knows me knows I'm pretty conservative and cheap spending town's money, but we think that money spent for police training is very important, for not only for our residents, but for the officers. We try to give them all the equipment they need to do their job, and we try to support them as much as need be. And when they get off the tracks a little bit, then we're going to bring them back on the tracks. So that's just a little outline of kind of what this police reform and reinvention plan has come to be. So we have had some interaction with the panel and some residents, and you get to see a different view. When you sit on that police side of things, sometimes you don't quite see how other people see things. So it's good to hear that, because you do lose sight of that. And I think kind of we have learned a few things that the chief is very, very anxious to implement in his department. And I think what our answer tonight, what we're here for tonight, is to see if the public, who hasn't been involved too much other than some emails, if anybody wants to speak to this plan or anything regarding the police department, this would be your opportunity to do that, because we have to adopt this plan by the end of the month. It's a requirement of this Executive Order 203 that has to be done. And if it's not done, then they withhold your state money and they penalize you. So I have looked at some other police departments and municipalities doing this, And I think that we really are the head of the class here. We had a lot of things in place before, and we have had interaction with people in the community to kind of give us their view about what they think about what goes on. So the panel has always had their input into these 4 meetings. So I think what we're looking for now, if there's anybody in the public who is watching this, wants to speak to it, then we'd be glad and happy to hear from them. So I'll hold up for a while and see if we have anybody come on.
Dana has a question.
Okay,
Hey there. I noticed on the plan, the crisis intervention team that you talked about. Why are we making that part of the police as opposed to a separate mental health response? I've seen great successes from groups like Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon that have non-police response to mental health, other breakdowns. They can have the police on, dial, but they find that only 1% of all cases, they actually need a police response. And that way you have unarmed medical and mental health workers that respond as opposed to police, which it's not a criminal issue. It's a breakdown issue. It's a assistance issue. So instead of trying to train police into being mental health workers, why don't we have a core of mental health and other types of workers that can respond 24/7? It seems like a good investure of time and a better way to achieve that goal.
yeah, listen, I kind of agree with you 100%. And we have talked to the county about that particular issue, that we would like these people to show up. The police themselves would be very happy if they were there. It's not a great call for the police to go on. And if you really look at policing, is that really what policing is? I don't think so. But the problem always lies with the only person you can get at 3 o'clock in the morning is the police officer. And we have documented lots of times where we have looked for mental health people to come and they haven't been available. And there's another issue that when these folks need to be transported to a facility for some help, we wind up taking it. So now the police officer's time is lost on patrol to transport this individual to a facility that they can help him or her, and then he has to come back again. So I think that's one of the things that the chief is talking about, that we'd like to get them more involved and more often. So, but I think that point's well taken. But the problem is that, I mean, I talked about this at one meeting. We get calls in the middle of the night about people have no water, people have a leak in their house, different things that happen that have nothing to do with policing. But there is nobody else to call. And the police have numbers that they call like the water department, sewer department, and or go and look in someone's house to see what the leak is, especially senior citizen. So sometimes the police, more than sometimes, probably way too much, police are going on non-police calls. This is one of them, and we recognize that. And we would rather have a professional there than a police officer who we are trying to train for this crisis intervention. So I think that we're on board with what you're saying. I know the chief has been talking to those folks out there, and hopefully they respond.
Follow-up question on that?
Yes.
Well, since wouldn't we need to create like a separate, like we couldn't just ask other professionals to do this as their off job. We'd have to have, just like police, a dedicated job where this is these people's job is to respond at 24/7. And I know that would be more resources, but it sounds like there's a definite need for it.
Yeah, there is definitely a need for it, and I'm not too sure that I have the resources as a municipality. It's a county, it's their responsibility to do that in the health department. And we have reminded them of that. And they have, listen, there's in Orange County, there's 40 municipalities, got 3 cities. You got, I don't know how many, 23 towns, and the rest of them are villages. And I guess they're responding to all of them. It's not particular to the town of New Windsor, these calls. These larger police departments, like 40, 50 people, they're responding to these all the time. And they all have the same problem. And the bottom line at the end of the day is they would rather not respond to them. But there is nobody else. And it always comes down to resources. And the county has the department, so I'm looking for them to step up a little more. Anybody else?
On Facebook, Michelle says that she has questions that she submitted to the email. I'm not sure who's monitoring the email right now.
Chief, you got anything from someone named Michelle?
I have one email that just popped in. I'll read it to you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Marte Nzanka. I am a town of New Windsor resident for 28 years and a criminal defense attorney for over 30 years. I understand the many hats the police must wear on a daily basis, but I have some questions. I have read on the New Windsor Police Reform and Plan consisting of 6 pages. One question I have is regarding drug, tobacco, and vaping awareness. Can there be a program stating in the elementary schools in which not only the police but substance abuse workers can come to the schools regarding this? Many years ago in my public school, there was a drug abuse program in the 1970s in my elementary school where the people came into the classrooms and spoke to the young students on an appropriate age level about drug abuse. They brought fake sample items such as needles and fake heroin powder. I think this would be a great program. Can a grant be pursued for this again? I am not aware of what is offered in public schools in New Windsor / Newburgh Enlarged School District. Number 2, what is discussed regarding the use of police dogs in New Windsor? Number 3, with regards to Hope Not Handcuffs, what occurs if a person turns themselves into the police and they have active warrants? And 4, who is the CIT coordinator?
You want to answer those questions, Chief? What do you want me to?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
So in regards to the drug, tobacco, and vaping awareness, that's something that if the school district asked us to approach, that's something the police officers could do. But I do think you have a good point where there is a county department that could also probably handle that. But those requests would probably have to come in through the school district, as we can't just go there and do it on our own. And we are always have no problem working with the school districts. Michelle, as you probably know, there's 2 school districts in New Windsor, Washingtonville and Newburgh. So if they had those needs, we could certainly meet them. As far as grants go, I'm not aware of any grants in regards to tobacco use or anything like that for the school districts. We don't do the DARE program here in New Windsor. That's something we did many years ago. We no longer do that. Moving on to the second question, what was discussed regarding the use of police dogs in New Windsor? That's something that would be under the use of force discussion that we had. We didn't specifically talk about the use of police dogs, but we did go over the last 2 years worth of use of force reports in which there were no dog use. And I think you're getting into, you know, is a police dog biting people? So in the last 2 years, no, there hasn't been any dog bitings or anything like that. So we'll move on to question 3 with regards to Hope Not Handcuffs. What happens if a person turns them in with active warrants? Well, we would look at that, and that is one of the things we look at. If it's a very serious warrant, you know, as you can imagine, some people have some serious warrants out there. We probably would have to make the arrest, but again, we have a lot of discretion. So if it's a lower level, say drug offense or maybe a shoplifting or something like that, we could certainly put that off, because getting that person treatment, in my opinion, is far more important. And for those warrants that were more serious as well, so let's say somebody has something for a shooting or something very serious, services are also offered in the jail. So while our first and best option would always be the Hope Not Handcuffs program, sometimes things are out of our hands, but that is something our officers are trained in. When someone turns themselves in for Hope Not Handcuffs and they come here for help, we understand that they're looking for help. So that's our first option, and that's what we want to provide to them. And number 4, who is the CIT coordinator? That would be Sergeant Christopher Sylvester. He works the 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift for us. And I hope that answered all your questions.
Just a comment on the police dogs. In reality, the canine unit is a wonderful PR tactic for the police department. They always will go to schools, they'll go to camps, and they put on demonstrations, and people kind of really enjoy seeing the dog. The dogs can work, but usually it's more like someone sees a dog, they don't want any more trouble, and that's the end of it. So that's why there's not a lot of dog bites, things going on. People who are like acting up and see a canine unit show up, that kind of usually changes things. And they're a very good PR tool. We have one new dog now in training with one of our officers, and one of our canine units is getting a little long in the tooth and will be retiring in a couple of years. So I spoke to the chief that we probably need to get one in training. So now we'll have two dogs for a little while and the other one retire. But to me, it's always been a wonderful PR tool. People really enjoy canines.
John O'Malley.
John O'Malley.
Well, I was going to try and give other people a chance, but seems
That's okay.
like I'm up.
You're up.
First, I want to thank Supervisor and Chief and the committee. I really think you guys have done an outstanding job at this, complying with this EO 203. I have been paying attention throughout other parts of the state, and probably most of the people on the committee know. I don't know if I've had an outsized influence in commenting, but I've definitely been passing along my thoughts all along the way. And so I do think that this town has done an excellent job of figuring out what needs to be done, both objectively, meaning that before this EO even came out, I think we were heading in the right direction anyway. I think we have the right mentality and noble interests in mind with doing this, and I appreciate the idea of having an ongoing or a permanent committee, especially because, some other towns, like the supervisor mentioned, some other towns are not as doing as well as we are, but they also have to deal with issues that we have been fortunate not to deal with here. And, in some cases, they have a lot more problems. They may have a lot more difficulty with some of the citizenry. They may have some difficulty with the police in certain areas. I mean, I really think that we do a great job, but I also think we're very fortunate being in the position that we're in. So as we move forward, if we run into any of those situations, we want to make sure that we are alert and make sure that we know what we should and shouldn't do going forward, and have the ability to adjust whatever the environment is at the time and so forth. So I just wanted to thank everybody, and I really appreciate everything that everybody's been doing, not just because it's my town and I'm from New Windsor, but I really think that you set the standard very high, and I appreciate it. I also, by the way, one other thing, the makeup of the committee was mostly according to the executive order, with people from religious organizations, people from community groups, people from schools, but we also added an extra person, Ms. Harris, and I think that was unique to New Windsor, and I appreciate the supervisor for asking her to join, and I appreciate her participation in here, and I think that was really vital to the success of this, and so I want to thank you very much, Ms. Harris, for the work that you did here.
Thank you, John.
Jackie.
Okay, Jackie.
Hi, so my name is Jacqueline Simons. I was very excited to reach out to the police chief when I was watching previous meetings that you were all conducting on police reform. My son is Gamron Ivory. He is currently 13 years old and diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder. He's on the autism spectrum. He has ADHD, a mood disorder that has not been diagnosed, and encopresis. The reason why I'm bringing him up tonight is because he's had multiple interactions with the police department, with you in New Windsor. I was sharing with the police chief when he contacted me about some of the times that the police had to be dispatched to my home. And I had shared with him, feeling times of being like embarrassed or ashamed, of the situations that were happening at my home. And I think I was just very excited to kind of like reach out and let you all know how much of an impact that the police department had on my child's life at that time. My son struggles at times with communicating, regulating his emotions, and he often misinterprets his own environment. As a result, he can become extremely violent and aggressive. My son needs assistance and prompting with managing daily activities such as using the bathroom and keeping up with personal hygiene. Just a quick background information on him. He had his first neurologist appointment at age 2 for concerns of possible seizure activity, and we had to rule out a genetic disorder. Through age 3 to 5, Gamron began receiving daily treatments for occupational, speech, and physical therapy. Once he entered kindergarten, all of these assisted services that were once put into place to help him with these activities in his life were completely removed. He stopped receiving these services because he was declassified as a child with disabilities. This was a good thing because it suggested that he had made enough progress and goals such as gross motor skills, learning to tolerate water on his hands and other textures to prevent severe behavioral episodes. I was very pleased and overjoyed with his accomplishments, but knew very early on that there would be more challenges and possibly harder ones for him to overcome. In 2017, the New Windsor Police Department and the Crisis Intervention Team became involved in our lives as puberty began to set in. I started receiving phone calls from teachers that he would take his own sensory breaks throughout the day by sitting underneath a desk or wandering the halls. He struggled making friends in his classroom, and he caused disruptions with repetitive motions such as tapping or pacing the room. Gamron also has issues with understanding personal space. I started him on medications to assist with experiences of depression and anxiety. I made endless phone calls to school personnel, specialists, behavioral therapists, community support services, and county officials to get more help with caring for him. At home and in school, his behaviors became overwhelmingly unsafe. He was tearing his clothes, headbanging, punching himself, spitting, throwing objects, and often eloping from my residence and in a school setting. My son was seen in the emergency room over 19 times throughout the course of 1 year. 19 times. And that was more times that the police was at my residence. 19 times that the police, your police department, or even a local ambulance had to transport my son to the emergency room. Every single time I would use a PRN to sedate him during an episode that was causing severe episodes. And this was oftentimes a sublingual medication. Every single time he was discharged at the emergency room after returning to what they considered baseline. When dispatched and responding to my address, the police officers were often very prepared. And this is where the positive feedback comes. You guys you often turn your lights and sirens off to not provoke him. That was a huge thing for me, is that you guys were understanding what you were coming into, what type of environment was happening. I often stress, oh my God, the police are going to come in. My son's 5'4" and close to 200 pounds. When he's in a state of not being able to control his behaviors, he can become extremely violent. And I was very concerned how the police would handle him. At no time was he placed into handcuffs, and it was very much a very calm experience and reaction and response from the police department. They spoke to him as a human being and gave him respect as an individual. This is more than I can say for case managers, mobile mental health, crisis response workers that were assigned through various local agencies. The police department would even visit with me or him on days that he was not in crisis to check on him. Again, more than I can say for local supportive agencies. My son developed trusting relationships with the police, as he would, on his birthday, buy cupcakes, and he would want to go to the police department to share with you guys. I thanked God more than once for the men and women who serve on the New Windsor Police Department. It is a very responsible action to train every officer for these situations. I did worry again how my son would be treated. Your officers were extremely professional, and my son has now had a good experience with law enforcement as a result and understands that you are there to help him if and when he should need it. And I wanted to speak on this because I know in the previous meetings, the chief had said, well, there's no way of really measuring how well we're impacting the community. My son currently is he has his good and bad days, but he's currently in a residential program. He's been approved for Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, so hopefully he will get some support services through them. It is a hard process to navigate the mental health system. There were times when he was on home instruction for about 5 to 6 months out of a school year. Imagine the burden, imagine the hardship on a family for a child to be out of school for that period of time. And especially right now with COVID, it adds on to the stress for a child with special needs. And so I wanted to thank, your police department. You guys handled him very, very well. And it was help that I really needed at that time.
Jackie, I really appreciate you kind of opening yourself up tonight, but it gives, I think, people listening an insight as to what the police actually do. Some of the things we see that on television or in the news doesn't portray the things that go on every single day. So I know it was probably hard for you to come on tonight and give us that, but I appreciate you telling us your feelings and how things went for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons, too.
Thank you. Jackie, it touched my heart, your story. Thank you very much for sharing your very personal story with us. And thank you, Chief, for overseeing a tremendous department.
Ms. Simmons, I also just wanted to thank you for sharing that. I lead a residential treatment center at St. Christopher's and can relate with a lot of what you're saying. And I've had the same experience with the police. They've been so wonderful in understanding things that are frankly not very understandable at times. So I really appreciate your bravery and sharing your story with people, because it really benefits all of us to hear this and to really understand, your needs and your child's needs. So thank you for that.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, on Facebook we have a couple.
Okay.
Michelle just wanted to follow up and say thank you that you answered all of her questions. And she also commented on Jackie's story and wanted to say that it was great to hear and that's good training on the police department. We then have a comment from Laura, who wanted to say, I absolutely have to say I love the New Windsor Police Department. They always protect me and my family, and God bless their families. I've been living here for 29 years. We then have a comment and question from Darren in regards to community policing. He said, I think it's important to have officers who really want to be involved in police community program. Not everyone is a good fit for a program such as this. My question is, how are officers selected? Is it a volunteer program for officers to get involved in, or are they told it is an assignment they have to take? Personally, I think it's a great idea.
Chief?
Yeah, so with the way we set up our community policing unit, it's set up, right now there's 13 members. They're all volunteer basis. There's a sergeant in charge of the community policing unit, which is also Sergeant Christopher Sylvester. He's the one that, will talk to the officers if we're in need of a couple more officers to be in the unit. And again, we want officers that want to be involved in that unit, And it's pretty easy to, it's round pegs and round holes, right? So, there are officers maybe that have been on the job for a long time that maybe don't want to be on that unit, and that's okay. We just have to make sure we put the right people there, and we do. And they're very active, and the panel saw some of the reports from the community policing unit and all that they do. and the feedback that we've gotten in regards to that. But yeah, absolutely, it's volunteer. It's not something we would force them to. And the interesting thing with it too, so we have 13 members on the unit right now. I could assure you that there's many, many more that want to be on the unit. So it's kind of a first come, first serve. The guys that have been on the unit have been there for quite a while. And then there's also other times where, you know, if the unit's not available or something comes up last minute, you know, officers will step up like on that shift to go do something, to go handle something. And they always do an excellent job. I never hear feedback in regards to a community event or something, whether it be a business asking us to do something, a school district asking us to do something that, oh, why'd you send that officer? He was terrible. That just doesn't happen. And we give tours of the police department. We do presentations for the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts, local businesses. Sometimes they'll do trick-or-treating events or things in their businesses. They ask us to participate. We do. So it runs very well. It's a very well-oiled machine because we've been doing it for so long. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I'd like to thank Laura for her comments about being here 29 years about the police department. It's nice to hear. Anybody else out there?
That's all I have on Facebook for right now.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald?
Nothing pending in the queue.
Huh?
Nothing in the queue.
Nothing in the queue. Okay, so I think that this probably wraps up this portion and would wrap up the entire project that we've undertaken here. And I think that we'll meet the guidelines set out by the governor. And I'd just like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank the chief, Robert Dorse, for all of his good work every single day. And he was very, very involved, and he was the main player behind this plan and involving the community members. He reached out to most of the panel himself, and we knew who we had to get involved in this. We understood the director from the state, and we kind of thought that that was the right way to go too. I mean, we really didn't think that they were too far off the tracks there. So the chief and his staff, administrative staff, for everything they do every day. I'd like to thank Dave Zagon, the town attorney. He's been involved in this with us from the get-go and helped the chief and I put together this plan. Especially like to thank the panel, those 13 people who were involved with us for a couple of months and were always speaking their mind. And we had some good input from them, and we appreciated that. We also appreciated people like John O'Malley, who did participate almost every meeting, giving us their thoughts. And as I said, it always gave us a little different perspective than the police are used to. Sometimes how the citizen sees things, not like the police officer sees it. But I think that one of the things that I'd like to see a little more of is us involved a little more in schools. We have Officer Pierce, he's in the Washingtonville schools over in Little Britain. And I really think that's a good program. And somehow I'd like to see us more involved with these schools. And I think that what Jackie was talking about, kids need to see the police in a little different light. And when they see them in schools, there is a little different light there. They begin to see that it's just another guy or another girl in a uniform, but they're just like everybody else. So I really think that those programs in the schools, I'd like to see them come back. When we have an officer in the schools, I think it helps generational, that people get a little better look at what the police officers are really like. Sometimes you see them go by in a car. A lot of times we call it a cocoon. They're in a cocoon, they drive by and they maybe wave and maybe don't even look at you. But it's just a regular person in that car. It just happens to have a uniform on. I think that we've covered all the bases with the governor, but I've always said that in my experience, and I've had a lot of experience in police work, I've commanded hundreds and hundreds of people. It's always been my thought that if the police supervisors are doing their job, then everything will be fine. And in particular, I've always said that the sergeant is the main player in that, because he or she is out in the street with the officers responding to calls. So the chief sets the tone for the police department, no question about that. But the sergeant is the one who shows up to these calls, and they don't normally get assigned a call. They respond to calls that they think they should go on. And we have sergeants who are very involved in responding to calls to make sure that they're handled properly. And I think some of the incidents that we have seen on television and the news, you don't see anybody with stripes. You don't see anybody. And that has always been an issue for me. You get a police supervisor there, things will be handled properly. As long as the guy at the top, and fortunately for us, it's Robert Dorse here, sets the tone. So I think some of the things that we talked about are very, very important. But I have always believed that if people are supervised properly, there will be no problems. And there's always people in the background, like the chief, and people like me, who will ask those hard questions about why. Why did you do that? And good cops do the right thing all the time. They really do. Sometimes you kind of like not sure what the right thing is, but people will ask you questions, and if the sergeant shows up, he or she will get it going in the right direction. And that has always been very important to me, and I'm very happy with the sergeants that we have in the Windsor. We instituted a policy as soon as I got here. We will pay overtime to have a sergeant on every shift. Not going to be an officer in charge, it'll be a sergeant. So he will be responsible for what happens on that shift. So to me, that's money well spent. And just want to wrap it up by thanking the panel in particular for your help and your input. And hopefully when we begin to do the things and these action points that the chief put in the plan, he will be following up on that. I will be following up with him on that. So there's not a lot of idle talk that goes on in my office. When we say we're going to do something, we do it. So once again, I thank everybody for participating, and hopefully we'll see you all again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good
Jackie,
night.
thank you.
Thank you all. It's been great.
Thank you, everyone. Likewise. Thank
you.
Be well, all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, George.
Good night.